toll-free call-in number, and you'll have to enter an access code as well. So we're going to send that around, and then we'll get started in about a minute. Okay, it is the top of the hour, and it looks like all of our audio issues have been resolved. I did just send around again the 866 toll-free call-in number, so if you are having trouble, you can just hop on the line with us and listen through your telephone. But it being the top of the hour, I am going to get started. Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar, 5 High Liability Problems in the Safe Management of Nightclubs, Bars, and Arenas. During today's interactive webinar, our presenter, Dale Yeager, will cover understanding general management practice and security as it relates to accidents, the bouncer issue, what you don't know about crowd control, the door, and security plans and the culture of the venue. The presenter for today's webinar is Dale Yeager. Dale is the president and CEO of Seraph, a consulting and training firm. Seraph offers corporations, schools, colleges, hospitals, government agencies, municipalities, law firms, and individuals a vast array of programs to solve problems. His clients include the House of Blues and the SBE Group, which owns LA Nightclubs, Area, Hyde Lounge, and the Abbey. Dale has extensive training in criminal psychology and forensic psychology, including advanced training at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. As a criminal analyst, Dale has consulted on numerous criminal cases, including the first murder investigation of John Benet Ramsey. Dale's research on violence has been published in the FBI Law Enforcement Bulletin and Profiling Violent Crimes by Dr. Ronald Holmes. Dale has done the best to incorporate the questions that were sent in prior to the event into his presentation. If you have a question that pertains to the presentation, please submit it by using the chat feature or the Q&A feature, which is found on the right-hand side of the screen. We will be taking a question and answer break, probably 2 during the presentation. Approximately 1 hour after the event, we'll send out an email with a link to the archived recording of the webinar. And we do ask that you take the time to fill out the survey that will appear on your screen after the webinar is over. We welcome all of your feedback. I'm now going to turn the presentation over to our presenter, Dale Yeager. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Dale, it's all yours.
Hi, everybody. Welcome, and thank you for joining us here on a snowy day. Today, what I would like to talk about is the issue of liability within nightclubs, bars, entertainment facilities, and arenas from a radically different perspective than you may be used to. Whether you're an attorney or a law firm that represents these entities, or you're an attorney or law firm that has an action against these organizations, I want to give both sides of the perspective and help you understand a little better. It is a serious, serious problem in America. If you go to Google News and put in nightclub crime or accident, arena and accident, you'll find that you'll get several hits every day, several times a day. And this problem is solvable. It is preventable. And let me repeat that again. This is a preventable problem. Nothing aggravates me more than when people say, well, things happen and you can't deal with them. The bottom line is that after 20 years, I've realized very clearly, I've seen it every day in the work that I do and the work my company does. We can protect and prevent these problems from happening. It requires some training, some change in policy, and primarily management, a change in the way management is done. Our motto is a well-managed company is a safe company. This is true of any entity. Management is the key to solving these problems. Every time you have this type of an accident or a crime committed in these venues, you can look back and you can see a failure of management. Management isn't just human beings managing other human beings, as in the case of security or ushers or bartenders or personnel, but it's also a failure of proper policy. If you don't know how to do something, you shouldn't do it. I cannot be an attorney. I can talk intelligently with all of you about the law because I'm a legal expert and I've worked in that world, especially criminal justice, for a long time. But at some point my knowledge will stop and yours will continue because I do not have the training and the experience that you all have. And so you cannot teach what you do not know. This is something that I know very well, the proper management of a nightclub, bar, or arena. And many of them, I would say, and I'm not pulling this number out of the air, I would say more than 80% in my 20 years of experience are poorly managed and are really an accident or a lawsuit waiting to happen. The bottom line is management is the key. Now some of you say, well, what about security equipment? I have yet to find a security camera that has cognitive function and peripheral vision. If you find one, please email me and let me know. I'd love to look at it. Only human beings have the ability to make cognitive decisions and to see things peripherally. So cameras and security equipment cannot be relied on as the primary tool. They're actually secondary to human management. A well-managed company is a safe company. General management practice and security as it relates to accidents. Starting, number one, with human resources. In many cases, HR is the key failure in these problems. In fact, recently we had shootings at a college and an elementary school in Tennessee. Many of you know about Professor Bishop and the shooting that happened down south. These are failures of HR. And just bear with me while I prove my view here. HR has to hire these people and they have to vet them. They have to do the background. And the due diligence process is complicated. We believe that a due diligence process has to act like a criminal investigation. You have to start with the assumption that something is wrong and either prove that true or not true. We do that a lot in our financial investigations. The problem is that in both of these cases, you had a teacher in the school in Tennessee and you had a professor in Alabama. HR failed to do their job, failed to find the information and find the negative information that would have prevented their hiring, and probably would have prevented, and most logically, these shootings from occurring, at least in those entities. Bottom line is that you have to hire properly, and you have to train and manage security people properly, otherwise you have liability. Poor hiring and poor management create liability issues. I see this all the time in arenas especially where you have ushers who have to act like ad hoc security people, but they're not trained to understand crowd management. They're not trained in how to verbally deal with people in a loud environment. You know, it's one thing to have somebody come in and teach people how to talk to people in a calm setting. Another thing to do it during a concert. That takes a whole other set of skills, and that's where part of the problem is. Security affects every aspect of the management of an entertainment venue, bar, nightclub, arena, outdoor event. This can also be a state fair. It can be a football game. Number one is money management. Many times the way money is managed and secured in these entities is very poor. Again, you cannot do what you do not understand or know. And the problem is you have a lot of people who are managers who have never been properly trained in how to handle money. And so what happens a lot of times is that money is stolen. When money is stolen, those people tend to encourage you to hire their friends who also have the same ethics. And when those people are hired, then now you have a culture in there of thieves. And that's not a very big leap from thief to criminal. And I'm talking about violent criminal. There is a correlation between the two. Again, at the core of all this is poor hiring practice, employee management. You can't manage people that have personality defects and poor ethics. This is really at the core of it. And when you're doing depositions, for example, those of you who are in actions against these entities, you need to understand that in that process, you need to really focus on management questions. You know, when we do prep work, we do a lot of prep work on cases in the discovery phase. And one of the things we do is help write those questions and depositions, and we really focus on the management issues, and you start to see the weak points of what I'm saying to you right there in the answers to those deposition questions. Supply management, the management of items that are stolen also is another issue. And again, stealing is correlated to violence. I wish I had more time to go into this. I don't, but it is correlated to that for about 40 years of research. The bouncer issue. A bouncer is a thug. A bouncer is untrained muscle. A bouncer's ego causes problems. A bouncer is not a professional. Just calling someone a bouncer should require you to be sued. And I'm being facetious here. But ultimately, when you hire a bouncer, the very term means that they are there to do physical aggression. It makes no sense. You say, well, Dale, it's semantics. Well, I would say that all of you who have went to law school know that the law is about semantics, the definition of words. And behind the definition of a word are people's attitudes about that word. If you're hiring muscle, if you're hiring untrained bouncers or thugs, what you're going to get is a lot of aggression, a lot of liability. Recently, some of you saw conflicts that have happened in Atlantic City, in Las Vegas, and New York with bouncers beating the living daylights out of patrons. And no one says anything. They just say, well, that's just the way it is. That's what bouncers do. The problem is that's a liability. When I talk to owners of nightclubs and bars and arenas, many of them have a very, very unethical attitude. They say, well, you know what, these accidents and these fights, they rarely happen. We'll just throw the dice against the wall and we'll gamble at the whole concept. We'll just take a shot at it. Instead of spending $30,000 or $40,000 to come in and do an audit, a security audit, and have training done with their people to reduce that liability chance down to single digits, they'd rather pay out several $100,000 in payments. It makes no logical sense. But the problem is that they don't understand security. They don't understand it as a profit center. And security is a profit center. It's properly done. But you cannot make a profit with security that is run by bouncers. Bouncers are thugs. Bouncers are untrained muscle. And I've seen many times in nightclubs across the United States in my 20 years, bouncers actually beating up people so they can gain access to their girlfriends, for example. I've seen them cause more problems, take $100, palm $100 to let somebody into an unauthorized area. We see it all the time. A security professional is a qualified, properly trained and managed employee. And by the way, you don't have to pay them a lot of money to make them security professionals. It is about training and attitude. And as Peter Drucker, the famous management guru, said, you hire good people and make them good employees. And again, we come back to the HR problem. Moving on. What you don't know about crowd control. Well, first of all crowd control starts when the first person enters that venue, that bar, that nightclub, that arena. The first person, that's where it starts. It's called ingress. If you wait till 100 people or 200 people have already congregated on the floor or in that venue before you start thinking about crowd control, you've already lost the battle. Crowd control starts with a preemptive meeting. It is amazing to me how many arenas, nightclubs, and bars do not have a security briefing before the event starts or before the evening starts. When I ask owners about this, they say, well, I'd have to pay those people for them to sit there for a half hour and be briefed on what's going to happen tonight. I mean, ultimately, this is poor management, this is laziness, and ultimately it's, in my opinion, unethical behavior. So, who's in the crowd? You have to know that. You have to know who you're going to expect on a Monday night that's different than a Thursday night. That happens. That happens a lot, where there are different crowds for different bands, ultimately. Venue design. How the venue is designed is critically important. For example, the Hyde Lounge in Los Angeles, where we do work on risk management training, Hyde Lounge is very narrow. It's very small. It has a lot of issues with emergency exiting, which we fixed. Now the House of Blues venues, there are 12 of those. They're very large and very open, but they're general admission, and so that creates a whole other issue that has to be dealt with. So the venue design is critical to understanding that. That's why, just like you audit your books, these venues have to have security audits done. And that's, by the way, recommended. You need to all know that. It's all recommended by the national organizations that oversee corporate security. They all recommend yearly audits to be done, but most of them are not doing them. Number 3, the verbal control issue. When you have a crowd of people, you have to control them from day one. You have to do what's called Xing the crowd. It's a technique where you divide the crowd up into sections so they're easy to manage, and you can get emergency personnel, fire and rescue, in there to help people. But that requires verbal skills. How many times have I seen bouncers or security people who mumble, who really shouldn't have been hired in the first place because they have no verbal skills? It is not a matter, security is not a matter of 6'5", 280 pounds. It's really a matter of skill of verbal communication. And this is another area where HR or managers fail to hire good people. But you have to teach verbal control. It is not something that comes naturally to people. The door issue. Control happens at the door. Ingress and egress, going in and leaving. You control people at the door. You have to train people to understand groups and dynamics of groups as they come in that venue. And this can be done very fast. The U.S. Secret Service is able to scan hundreds of people at one time and do mini profiles on them as they're watching a crowd. We teach this. We teach the same technique that the Secret Service does because my senior vice president, Sam Sullivan, was a 20-year special agent in the Secret Service. And so we teach the same concept. It's not hard to do. It's easy to learn. It only takes a few hours to be able to scan a large group of people and know exactly what's going on. Control happens at the door. Your best people have to be at the door. When you're doing depositions, by the way, you want to find out what is the experience of the person that was at the door the night of the event, because that's really the key. Prevention happens at the door. Everything is prevented at the door. That's the key place. That's where the best of the best have to be the entire evening or the entire day. And this is true of gates. You know, if you have an outdoor arena that has no roof on it, if you have a state fair, the best of the best has to be at the gate. Just think of door or gate depending on the situation. Security plans and the culture of the venue. An emergency plan is after the fact. It doesn't prevent anything. But yet so many nightclubs, bars, and entertainment venues like arenas have these emergency plans. Well, an emergency plan is a screw-up plan. It's a cleaning list. I don't like to clean. I don't think any of you like to clean. It doesn't prevent anything. It's after the fact. Where is the prediction and prevention? That's a security plan. And that's where the failure is in all of these arenas, in all of these nightclubs and bars. Their security plan is so poorly designed. One of the reasons why is because generally law enforcement officers get hired to be security directors in these places. Now, our company has trained over 320,000 law enforcement officers in 20 years. We are HIDA and McLaughlin trainers for the federal government. We do a lot of law enforcement training, and I will tell you, on a local, state, and federal level, most law enforcement never get proper crowd control training or any crowd control training, and they certainly don't understand security inside of a venue. That's something that has to be taught to them. Cops are cops. They're used to going in after the fact or going up to an event, arresting someone, having a shield. In corporate security, you don't have that. They don't have that authority. And so to make that transition, they need training just like everybody else. This is something that eludes a lot of owners, a lot of corporate boards who hire people coming out of law enforcement thinking and assuming they have that skill. And they do not. They do not. A security plan is centered on the culture of the venue. It must be customized. Now, out in Los Angeles, one of our places that we work at is the Abbey. The Abbey is approximately 30,000 square feet. It's a huge nightclub and restaurant. It's the largest gay nightclub in Los Angeles. Now, it is different than the area, which is where Britney Spears and all the famous people go that you see on TMZ. Those are very different. They're designed differently. They have a different group of people that are coming in, and so they need customized plans based on that. One size does not fit all. And here's the other problem that we see with nightclubs, bars, and entertainment venues and arenas. They're buying off-the-shelf software, off-the-shelf emergency plans and security plans. Again, it has to be customized. Customized to the culture of the venue, the design of the venue. It has to be customized. Otherwise, it's a liability waiting to happen. So, what I'm going to do now is take questions from all of you. I don't want to spend a lot of time going over this. I think I've explained our perspective on this, and what I'm going to do now is just take your questions and answer them to the best of my ability. So, Matt? Matt? Okay, I don't hear Matt. All right, so Evan has a question. All right, Evan has a question.
I'm sorry, Dale. I was having some technical difficulty. I have a question here from Jennifer.
Oh, okay.
Can you please talk more about the differences between verbal versus crowd control, or are they one and the same?
Well, as part of crowd control, you have to have verbal tactics to control people. So, for example, one of the things we teach is the power of three, how to group statements and words into threes, how to encounter people in groups of threes, because the human mind loves this. I don't have time to go into to this in full, but again, you have got to teach your people how to not mumble, how to clearly speak, especially in a loud environment. A lot of times, miscommunication happens. Someone gets angry because they don't hear the entire conversation because people are mumblers. You literally have to teach people how to speak correctly and speak in that environment. You have to use short sentences and short words that the unconscious mind, what you would know as the subconscious mind, can hear. It's not hard to teach, but the process behind it is fairly complicated scientifically. And so also your body language, how your face looks, how you stand. For example, males want you to approach them from the right. Females want you to approach them from the front. If you approach a male from the left, they are immediately going to get aggravated. And see, it's these things, these little things that need to be taught to people so they understand that, so they don't cause a problem that doesn't need to occur. But as far as crowd control and verbal control is part of crowd control, very, very critical. And when you're going through and exiting the crowd, for example, you want to talk to people and ask them to do you a favor. You know, can you do me a favor is the most manipulative phrase in the English language, because we always say, sure, what is it? We agree before we even know it. So you can use that to your advantage. Also, when you're doing crowd control, you're basically acting out on kindergarten training. Because in kindergarten, you learn social norms, and you were pre-programmed to follow commands. So all we're doing is becoming the kindergarten teacher. This is how we teach this. And so there's some really pretty sophisticated stuff behind this that people need to know to make sure that they can control a crowd and not cause the accidents that we see constantly. I mean, I've got so many paraplegic and quadriplegic cases coming through the door now from arenas, particularly, and nightclubs, where the crowd surged because it wasn't being managed correctly, because no one knew how to control the crowd, and someone broke their neck or their spine. There's no excuse for that. None whatsoever. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, I think it did. Thank you, Dale. We have a question from Edward, who asks, what recommendations do you have regarding bar fights?
Well, first of all, if there's a fight in a bar, you've got to have training on how to break those up and how to control them, and not just one-on-one. You've got to deal with multiple groups, because if it's a lot of females fighting, they fight as a group. And more younger males under the age of 25 are fighting as a group rather than one-on-one. And so you've got to know how to deal with males and females who fight, because they fight very differently. You've got to know how to deal with groups that fight. And in a bar situation, you may only have 2 people doing security, and maybe the bartender assisting, and so everybody's got to be a part of that process, and they've got to be all trained to know that. You know, when we train security personnel, we also do training for the waiters, the waitresses, the bartenders, the support staff, because they're going to have to help in the process. So.
Okay, we have a question here that asks, how do you address the door issue if you have a private event where the venue is hosting and someone else has chosen who can attend?
Well, first of all, okay, if I understand the question, Matt, you own the venue and you're renting it out to someone? Is that?
I believe that's correct, yes, for
okay.
a private party, and there's a private invitation list that you're
right.
not to.
Well, a proper security plan would say that if you're going to rent out that facility to someone, they're going to be required to pay for your security personnel to be on site, to be your eyes and ears and your liability advocate for you on site during that event. Otherwise, you're throwing the dice against the wall. I mean, this is something we do in schools. We say, if you're going to rent the school gymnasium that night to do something, you're going to have to pay a little extra on top of the fee for our people to be there for security to be there and monitor what you're doing. That's how you prevent theft, that's how you prevent damage, and that's how you prevent accidents. Who is there when you rent out your facility or your client rents out their facility? Who is there advocating for you, looking out for your interests? You know, that's the bottom line. That's just logical.
Okay, we have a question here that asks, how can a bar/restaurant control the number of drinks provided to one person when the space includes more than one bar?
That's a management issue. Ultimately, there's specialized training, and in fact, I believe that Matt, TASA has some experts on this issue managing alcohol, if I remember correctly.
That is correct, yes.
Yeah, and this requires specialized training. Now, sometimes, depending on how sophisticated the state is, the state liquor control board has training that we've seen that's pretty good in helping understand the management of a bar. But generally, you're going to have to hire someone or get someone who has experience to make sure that the bartenders have the ability to recognize faces. It's a face recognition training that turns them into, really helps your memory quite a bit. And they're going to have to be able to memorize faces to understand that. It's kind of like card counting in a casino. But there are people out there that do that. And again, all of the venues that we work in professionally all have multiple bars, so people are moving around from one bar to the next. But those venues have professionals who come in and do the training, and the bartenders are communicating with each other, which also helps. They have their own radio system. So there's many ways to deal with that. It would take longer than we have for me to explain that. But
okay, great. Marvin has the question. Many bars/nightclubs are in small towns, and resources are limited for these entities. How do these small local venues implement some of the things that you have talked about if they can't afford the sophistication, the resources to teach the people that are managing their nightclub, bar, arena? Okay.
Well, Marvin, what I'm going to say, please don't get upset with me, but if you can't afford to do the ethical thing and to also have a business model that provides liability reduction and proper management, then I have a funny feeling that you're a poor business person. I'm not talking about you, Marvin, but your client has a poor business model, is poorly capitalized, and really doesn't understand what they were getting into. Ultimately, this is not just a legal issue and a bottom line profit margin issue. This is also an ethics issue. And so, you know, when you're taking people in from your local community into your entity and you're not taking proper precautions, and again, a lot of this stuff doesn't cost that much. A lot of times there are local resources that people can get from local emergency preparedness in the county, for example. But if you're not going to take and be properly designed as a business model and properly capitalized to do the right thing, I don't know, what am I going to tell you? I mean, it's You've got to do what is appropriate for your community. You can't just wing it and hope for the best. I mean, that's what it sounds to me, and maybe I misunderstood. But if you're a small entity, first of all, if you have a bar and you're not making a high profit margin, something's wrong. And the thing is that it sounds like there's other issues going on there. But some people, as Donald Trump says, shouldn't be in business. I don't want to sound harsh, but you got to do the right thing. You got to take the precautions. You're taking people into your building or into your arena, and you're saying, "I'll take care of you. I'll protect you." That's a heavy responsibility. That's an ethical responsibility. That's how I would answer that. So I don't know what else to say.
Okay, Randall asks, what factors are to be taken into account when determining whether a bar needs a bouncer versus just a bartender? Are there any written national standards or codes covering this?
There are no national codes. This is the only people that have national code on this would be the UK. In the United Kingdom, all door people, that's what they call them, are required to take training yearly and get certified in security management. I think it's an 8-hour program. And the reason why they do that is because their bar crime and violence in bars in the UK is extraordinary. In fact, for the last 4 years, Scotland has the highest amount of violent crime in Western Europe, and it's really become a serious issue. In fact, if you go to the Scottish government website, they have a whole page about this, and it's primarily in bars. And so they were dealing with this a long time ago. But no, there are no national laws on this, but there are standards that you must have a security person. The bartender's doing bartending. They can assist you, but you're going to have to, even in a small bar, you're going to have to at least one security person to have eyes and ears on the patrons of what's going on. That's just being responsible. It's good management, and it will actually benefit the bottom line of that entity. So having no security person and relying on employees to do that as part of their other tasks, I mean, that's a liability issue unto itself right there. So.
Okay, great. We have another question from Edward, who asks, aside from verbal control of bar fights, what are security professionals required to do to break up bar fights, or what is expected or within the ethical confines?
Well, first of all, if you can't tell that a bunch of people are about to fight, you shouldn't be in the business of security. When males fight, they always do the cobra. They puff up their chest, and they do a lot of cursing and pushing and shoving before the fists fly. And so as soon as you see a conflict happening, that's when you intervene. But that requires training to be able to see that. It even requires training of your eyes. There's 6 muscle groups in your eyes. We teach them how to train their eyes so they can see directly and peripherally in a better way, in an improved way, to pick those conflicts up so you can move on them quickly. So as soon as you see the puffing of the chest, as soon as you see a conflict, that's when you have to intervene, not after it starts. With females, it's a whole other animal. They go from 0 to 60 like a Porsche 911. So the only time that you know that females are going to fight is if they start an argument. If they are arguing, if there's any profanity or argument going on, you are literally seconds away from a fight with females. So again, it's a matter of training so that you can intervene early before there is injury. And then you have to know the laws in your local community. What is your responsibility outside of your venue, outside of your arena, outside of your bar or nightclub? What is the responsibility legally that you have? Is it 6 feet from your door? Is it 15 feet? It varies from community to community. When should you call 911? Well, that would be simple, when there's a crime. And the thing is that when Johnny punches Sammy in the face, that's simple assault. I don't care where you go. That's simple assault. If there's an injury, that may actually go up to aggravated assault if there's blood. If there's a weapon, it's aggravated assault. Again, you have to know the local laws, too. This is all about training. This is all about training. But you've got to be able to watch people and monitor them forensically very fast in a group setting. setting and be able to pick out when there's a conflict happening and move on that quickly. Bottom line. So.
Okay, great. We have a follow-up to Marvin's questions. He submitted a follow-up. Are there minimum precautions that you feel are standard for every setting? Being an attorney, how do we look at the issue of safety in these settings? He asked.
Well, you have to look at the fact that you've got to protect three things. So first is your customers, because they're the people that are paying the bills. Number two is your staff. Number three is the physical elements of the building. So the seats, the booze, the food, anything that has value. So you have to protect the people first and the items next. And so you've got to have a safety plan that addresses those three issues: the clients or customers, the staff, and the physical items, the physical property. And you have to first do the assessment. You have to assess what's working and what is not. That's a tough job because nobody wants to be criticized, but you've got to take a critical look at what's working and what's not with your policies. And you can't do that by looking at a book. You can't look at a policy book and say, oh, we've got a great policy. A policy is just words on paper. I want to watch it in action. We go to these places as customers. They don't know who we are, and we just sit and watch how they work. We see what the door people are doing. We see what the quote-unquote bouncers are doing. What is the bartender doing? What is in the arena? What are the ushers doing? We want to go there and watch people because a policy is nothing. It just sits there in a book. I want to see it in action. And so when you do an assessment, you have to see everything in action. That's the key. From there, from that assessment, that detailed management security assessment, then you go back and you design a book, a policy book, with specific procedures and penalties for not doing things, getting tough with your people. And you start to change that culture little by little. That's the key. That's the key. And so it's again, it's customers, it's staff, and it's physical assets. And then the assessment of how you protect those things. What are you doing now to do it? What's working, what is not, and what do you need to improve? I mean, it's more detailed than that, but that's the overview I would give you on it. So.
Okay, we have a clarification from a clarification question about the private party event management. The attorney asked, I was wondering about door crashers in private events that lead to fights and injuries on the premise of the venue. But it sounds like from the response that Dale, you gave, the solution is to have the event and the customer work together to implement a security plan that does its best to ensure that nothing will happen. Could you just elaborate a little bit more?
Well, you know what, Matt? I'll give everybody a great example.
That would be great.
How many of you remember the gate crashers at the White House a few weeks ago? Now, I'm going to tell you the true story of what really happened here. You have the special events coordinator. I'll use a simple term to explain who she is, for the White House. And what's happening is she's not putting everybody on the list, which goes to the Secret Service. The Secret Service has two levels. They have special agents. Those are the men and women in suits who are protecting the vice president, their families, the president. And then they have Secret Service Uniform Division, which they look like police officers. You see them outside of the White House letting cars in the gate. Well, the Uniform Division is what really was involved in these gate crashers. And what was happening was that White House staff members of that event management team were bullying them and basically saying, well, we know them, or we know these people, or these people are coming with these people. It's okay to let them in. And so they were violating the basic security protocols that have been in place in the White House for over 40 years. And so what was happening was that they were going off the list. So the first rule of thumb for an event to keep crashers out is to make sure that you, first of all, teach all your management people ethics so they don't compromise basic ethics. Number two is to have a list. And if you're not on the list, you don't get in. Okay, that's the bottom line. If you're going to have a special event, you tell the coordinators, anyone who is not on the list, does not have an invitation with their name on it, is not getting in. And you say, well, that's going to be oppressive to people. Please, I take off my shoes every time I go through security at the airport. I practically have to undress, so I think people are kind of used to this now. But you've got to coordinate that security with the organization and say, look, if they're not on the list, they're not getting in. That's how you prevent that. Now, here in Philadelphia, we have Temple University, which is an excellent model for all colleges and universities about how security should be done. So I'll give you a really great example here, Matt. So recently, one of my daughter's friends went to see a friend of hers at Temple. Now, at Temple, if you're going to have visitors come on campus, especially to a dorm, you have to let security know, and you have to fill out a form. And then when that person comes to the gate, they show their ID, and then they're allowed in. Well, being kids, college students, they show up, and they have another friend in tow who was not on the list. Security said, guess what? Because you brought this other person with you who is not on the list, none of you are getting in and wouldn't let anybody in the door. Now you say, that's harsh. No, that's how security is supposed to be done. The bottom line is people are lazy. People want to do things ad hoc. That's what hurts liability and security. So in answer to your question, you make a list. People don't have an invitation with their name on it, or people don't have an invitation, and then you can't verify they're on the list. They don't get in. And this would stop all of that nonsense. It will also prevent another problem. You have these people in a room. Let's say there's 200 people in a room for a dinner. Let's say 2 of them are having a nasty divorce battle, and one of their soon-to-be ex-spouses shows up and confronts them. How are you going to deal with that? Well, you don't let them in because they're not on the list. But I've seen spouses weasel their way into events like that, and even into the workplace, by manipulating people. Well, if you don't teach people how to identify the manipulation, they're going to let them in the door. This is not complicated. We're talking about 3 to 4 hours of training. This is not something that takes, days to do. It's simple to learn, but ultimately it's about having a process in place and being organized and being disciplined. And that's why, again, as Peter Drucker says, you hire good people and make them good employees. So hopefully that answered your question.
Okay, we have a question from Edward who asked, and Dale, you don't have to answer this if you don't want to. Who is the best expert you've ever had on the opposing side of you?
I can't think of anybody. I'm not trying to be arrogant. I usually what happens on the other side is they're hiring someone who's coming out of corporate security, or they're kind of a one-trick pony. And I would say to both sides who are listening today, choose your experts carefully. I mean, there's a lot of good people out there. There's a lot of great people at TASA. TASA does a really good job at picking people, but choose your people carefully. Someone who teaches in a college setting, who doesn't have real-world experience, that's a problem. Someone who worked at a company for 30 years doing the same thing, that's a problem too, because they were basically an employee. And so the question is, they're an expert in their corporate model and in that job they had, but what do they know about your case and your client, or the person or the company that you're suing? I mean, be careful about that. And I just haven't experienced a lot of times the opposite side is picking people, and I shake my head and I go, I feel bad for them because they're put into a position where they shouldn't have been chosen as an expert because they don't have any expertise in the field of security management. So, I don't know how to answer that really, other than that,
Excellent. Here's another question from Darren who asked, in a bar situation, when you say control happens at the door, does that mean that security personnel should escort a person out of the door and simply keep them out of the bar? What happens if the security personnel continue with the physical fight with the person outside?
Well, first of all, security does not get involved in fights. See, that's the bouncer mentality. Security professionals, law enforcement, do not fight people. They control them. The C word, control. And so right there is the problem. Right there is the issue that creates the liability. You're not there to fight. And when I see bouncers beating the living daylights out of someone, I go, wow, untrained thugs who are creating a lawsuit. That's what I see when I see it on TV. You don't fight these people, you control them. That's different, and that requires training. And it requires someone who is calm and someone who has a demeanor that is patient. You know? How many of you saw the movie Roadhouse? And in the movie Roadhouse, when he takes over the bar, he tells this one guy to get out. He says, you don't have the right personality for the trade because you're a hothead. You start the fights. And so, again, hiring people who have the basic personality and have personal ethics, that's the key that's half the battle right there. But you don't fight them, and at the door, to answer your question, at the door, you escort them out, and then you determine, you make a actual security assessment. Are they going to try to get back in? Well, of course they're going to try to get back in. If they start making threats to you, I'm going to blow you away, you're dead, that's a terroristic threat, and that's when you call police and say, we just threw a guy out, here's his description, he's outside, and he told us he's going to kill us. And we're very concerned. And that's why you also need your owners to have a good relationship, your managers to have a good relationship with local law enforcement. You know, take them out to lunch every once in a while and meet with them and have meetings with them about security. They'll do that. They're paid. They're given block grants from the Justice Department to do that very thing, community policing. So every law enforcement agency will do that with you. And if they won't do it with you, that's a concern. But ultimately, you've got to train people to make the right assessment. How many cases have come across our desk, Matt, with guys that have ejected people, and then they go outside, they don't have their ego in check because they're bouncers, and they get blown away. How many have we seen in the last couple months, Matt? At least 3?
Yeah, we've seen a good amount of those. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a preventable problem, people. That's preventable. That's preventable. No excuse for people going through suffering and pain like this. You should be able to go out to these places and enjoy yourself and be safe. And and you know what? Ultimately, low liability and safety are not an accident. They're a decision that you make as an organization. And if you're in a legal action against this type of thing, like a nightclub, a bar, or arena, you've got to ask yourself the question: what was the precautions they were taking? There's what they tell you and what they were actually doing. I'm more concerned about action. What's the action that was behind the policy? So, anyway, hopefully that answers the question. Matt, Lars has asked a question about mace and taser.
Go for it.
Can I answer that?
Sure, go for it, yeah.
First of all, tasers require training, and some states and some municipalities outlaw them. You can't use them. And so you have to be very, very careful with the taser because it has to be used properly. It can cause problems, medical problems. So it's got its own liability issues, and it really you have to be very careful with it. Now let's go to mace or pepper spray. I've been pepper sprayed 7 times in my life in training. 2 of them put me down. They were military grade mace, and it was pretty rough stuff. But here's the weak point in mace and pepper spray, and you might want to tell people that you know who carry it the problems with it. Number 1, if the air conditioning unit, if you're standing under a vent in a room and there's air conditioning or heat blowing down, it will blow the spray back in your face. If you're outside, a short, small gust of wind, I'm talking about a couple miles an hour, will blow it in your face. Number 2, under 40 degrees, so if it's cold outside, it clogs up. Number 3 is you got to practice. So you got to buy a practice version, and you got to practice to be good at it. It's not easy to get the safety guard off. So there's a lot of downside to those. It's much better, we believe, in our experience, to use the tools you have as a human being in concert, in a team environment, properly done to make that work. It's much better and less aggravation. That doesn't mean you shouldn't have armed guards in certain situations, but an armed guard requires a very unique person. It requires a lot of training, and you've got to pay for them to go practice several times a month. So that's a whole nother animal. So hopefully I answered the mace and taser question.
Okay, great. We have a question here from Melissa who asks, do you have any suggestions on checking ID in a restaurant that serves both food and alcohol, and how to keep minors from being served in that setting?
Well, first of all, you need to test your people. Now, most states have, with their liquor control board or whatever they happen to call it in the different states, they have a DVD that trains people on how to identify fake IDs. And by the way, the best training you can get is from the DVDs they put out for retailers to determine if someone is old enough to buy cigarettes. Those trainings on fake IDs are actually pretty good and better than actually the ones that are focused on alcohol. There's a lot of good programs out there. I mean, you can go on Amazon and buy one. You have, again, TASA has some experts in this area that teach this. So I would get with Matt and ask him, because if you can't afford to have an expert out, I mean, there are maybe even the consulting wing of TASA Group has a product like that. But there's a lot of good products out there to train people how to do that. And it's actually a lot of fun to learn, because you'll look at everybody's ID from that point on, very suspiciously. But there's a lot of resources out there for that. A lot of good resources. So.
Yeah, and just to top on what Dale said, we do have a consulting division that can help your private clients, your nightclubs and bars, with some of these training issues. We do have consultants that will go and spend some time with them and bring them up to speed on what they know. We have a question from Edward here, who asks, by way of follow-up about the security personnel during bar fights, he asks, what should a security professional do to protect themselves from an assault from a patron?
Well, the way to prevent assault from a patron is to be trained on how to deal with that. For example, there's a lot of guys out there who are all into mixed martial arts, and I would strongly discourage any of you who represent nightclubs, bars, arenas from hiring guys that are into mixed martial arts. I've met some good ones, but most of them just want to fight. And the problem is that they're taught a lot of things that are just they don't make sense logically or scientifically. One of the things we teach is to control the elbow. If you control someone's elbow with your hand, they cannot hit you. I don't care if they're 7 feet tall and 300 pounds. The elbow moves the man. It moves anybody. And we teach a whole concept of this, of how to use elbows to control a group of people, not just an individual. So as far as protecting themselves from getting hit, again, it's one thing to learn how to fight. It's another thing to learn how to control people. Those are two different things that have nothing to do with each other. So the simple answer is you have to learn how to control the elbow, and you have to learn how to control people. Fighting is fighting, but that doesn't belong in a security. That doesn't belong in security. That's a liability waiting to happen if you're coming as a fighter. I don't need fighters. I want people that are good people that can learn and understand how to control people verbally primarily, but also the ability to not crunch under pressure. One of the greatest security professionals that we have ever known, and we talk about her all the time, was a girl named Kat, who is about 5'3", out in Los Angeles. And she was a small person, but everybody who worked with her respected her because she could read fake IDs, she could talk to anybody, and physically she was a horse person, so she was used to moving around, 1,500-pound, 2,000-pound horses. She could also physically deal with big guys. But the thing about her was that she was the package of skills. But if you looked at her, most guys would never hire her for security because she wasn't tall, she wasn't a big person. But what she knew in her mind, her ability to communicate with people, was exceptional. She was like a Swiss Army knife of security. So a lot of times there's a lot of bias a lot of gender bias, in fact, in the hiring of security personnel. In fact, one of the things that will create a liability in your bar, nightclub, or arena is a lack of female security people. You've got to have females, because females can do things in a security setting that males cannot do. And so that's critical to tell your clientele, or to remember when you have an action pending against an entity. So.
Okay, we have a follow-up to the fighting issue. Evan asked, what about controlling fighting patrons and to prevent them from continuing to fight on the premises? What should security do in that instance? Like, how does security control the fight and make sure that it doesn't spill out in front of the venue or in the street? Or how do they control a fight in and outside of the venue?
Well, first of all, if for some reason they did not see it start, so they didn't intercede early, and now it's already happening, you're going to have to get them out the door. You don't want them to stay in the venue. To get them out the door, it takes some real skill. Once you get them out the door, now you've got a fight on your hands, which means you have a crime. This is critical to understand. And by the way, as you all know, because you all went to law school, if you don't report a crime, that's obstruction of justice. And I don't know of any state in the United States that doesn't have an obstruction of justice as part of their state code or state law. So it's a crime. You're watching a crime being committed. So as soon as that occurs, and if you can't verbally control them, and it can be done, verbally calm them down and control them and get them to calm down and go their separate ways, then you're going to have to call in law enforcement. That's the bottom line. And that's where that relationship is so critical. And that's where a lot of these cases fall apart, these legal cases, because security is being told by the owners, don't call the cops. Well, as soon as you do that, now you've created more of a problem. Now you've increased your liability issues. Again, if you don't know anything about security management, then you can't do security management. But in answer to your question, whatever it takes, you got to get them out the door, and that requires skill. And you use verbal skill, you use physical skill. Once they're out the door, if they're not going to stop, then you're going to have to call in law enforcement for assistance on that. Because, again, now a crime that started in your club or nightclub or arena is now outside. It's a crime. You got to have to report it. So that's the process. And you have to also look at your personal safety, because one of the buddies may have ran to the car and got a pistol. Now you're standing out there and you take a slug to the chest. I mean, I've got too many of those cases coming across my desk. Every case I see is preventable, 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 and it angers me because there's a lot of suffering coming across my desk, folks. I'm seeing paraplegic, quadriplegics, people with brain injuries, where if people had done their job and been mature professionals and had humbled themselves and got some training, none of this would have happened. None of it. It's really depressing sometimes, frankly. Anyway, next question.
Sure. Evan had a couple follow-ups, and this will probably be our last question for the day.
Okay.
He asked, well, what if the security personnel had already broken the fight up once and they gone their separate ways, and they decided, you know what, it was worth coming back and going for a round two? Did it follow the same pattern?
If that happened, then the security personnel were not properly trained, because as soon as they break up a fight, the first thing they should have said to each other, okay, when are they coming back? When's it going to start again? If you're properly trained, this is a lack of training right here, because they should have assumed that they were going to do that. Just like when you throw someone out. If you throw someone out, now you have to ask each other as the security people, the security team, okay, how are they going to sneak back in? We got to be on the alert for this guy. Make everybody know. Get on the radio and tell them, everybody got to keep this guy out of here. You've got to assume they're coming back. That's human nature. This is just basic forensic psychology. This is simple stuff that every cop knows. So again, if they didn't assume that they were coming back, that they were going to reunite and do their thing again, then that's a lack of training. That's a lack of poor security management, and there's your liability again. And if someone sues that bar or nightclub, and I do the expert report, I'm going to mention that, because all the national organizations like As Is, A lot of the arena organizations talk about this, that in the training you have to assume that they're going to come back. Once an event is over, it's never really over. It's never really over because it's always going to rear its ugly head. It's like if you block someone's punch, I guarantee you the other hand's already coming towards your face. So we teach, touch one hand, look at the other, because you know the other one's coming. And the same is true of when these events occur. They're not over. You have to assume the worst case scenario. They're never over until completely over, maybe a week later. And who knows if they don't go somewhere else and shoot each other. But as far as your venue is concerned, you have to assume they're going to try to sneak back or they're going to try to fight again. They're going to say something to start it all up again. You have to assume that, and you have to be prepared for that. That's the training. That's the security management that I talked about at the beginning of the seminar. So,
okay, Dale, are you up for one more?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go.
Okay, let's rock and roll. Lars asked, some bars in our state, and I'm not sure what state that is, have had their liquor license suspended because there have been too many calls to the venue. So isn't this a disincentive to call the police?
No, absolutely. They deserve that. In fact, we have a program that we designed about a year ago because we were so frustrated. In 2008, called Entertainment Venue Crime Prevention Program for city councils who are frustrated because they've got nightclubs and bars that have noise complaints, crowd control issues, violence and problems. And what the nightclubs, or what the city councils are doing is they're hiring us to come in, train the management teams in these nightclubs and bars to teach them proper security management to lessen this. But the thing is that if they're getting their liquor license or their license suspended, their license to operate suspended because they have too many calls, well, they have too many calls because they don't have the training and they don't have the security management system in place, or they wouldn't be having all those calls. I mean, it's cause and effect. I mean, it's Newton's law, you know. It's cause and effect. If they were doing the right thing, if they had a good system in place and they had good people managing this, they wouldn't have all those calls and they wouldn't be in that situation. And I'm sure that this is your client, but I'm just telling you that there's a correlation here between poor management, lack of training, and finally aggravating the local community to a point. And by the way, very large city councils like LA and Chicago and stuff are fed up. They're frustrated and fed up, and they're shutting people down. So I try to say to nightclub owners and bar owners, and to a certain extent arena owners, you've really got to get your act together or you're going to lose your cash cow. You're going to lose your little ATM there if you don't start putting some time and effort into fixing your security management issues. Because at some point, people are going to get fed up enough and they're just going to say, we don't want you operating anymore. And now all of a sudden the money stops, and now where are you at? And the thing is that I don't know the whole detail here, but I'm just basing your question on my experience in the 18 or so states we work in with this problem, where we tell some of these nightclub owners, we say, look, the local city council is going to pull your license. I mean, there's nothing we can help you with. There's nothing we can do. You're done. You waited too long. So, you know, if you have a problem like this, then you have to say to yourself as professional business people, gee, we've got an issue here and we really need to fix it. But if you just let it go, it's not going to fix itself. So, hopefully that answers the question for Lars. Okay, it looks like we don't have any more questions in the queue. So I'm going to wrap things up here, but we're going to keep the chat and the Q&A feature open for a couple minutes. So if you think of a question, you can send it in. And if you think of a question tomorrow, you can email it in to us, and I'll forward it on to Dale and get you an answer. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I want to especially thank Dale for putting together a great presentation. Dale, I think, you know, from the questions that we got, it seems like everybody took something from this presentation. So I thank you very much for putting the time into it. If you have a case or a consulting matter that you'd like to talk to Dale about or any of our other TASA experts about, you can call me here at TASA at 800-523-2319.
We will be sending out a link to an archived recording of this webinar later this afternoon. The archived recording will also be posted in the Knowledge Center of the website. Our next client-focused webinar will not take place on October 22nd, 2009. That date has passed, and I apologize for that. Our next client-focused webinar will take place in March. We have to send out the invitation for that, so please look for that in your inbox. And like I said, if you have any follow-up questions or comments, please feel free to email me at any time. My email address is mhyde@tasanet.com, and I'll send that around to everybody who attended today. And as Dale alluded to during the presentation, we not only provide experts for legal cases, but we have a consulting division that works with organizations, nonprofits, private companies, to help them implement some of the things that Dale talked about during his presentation. So if you have a client that you think would benefit from this service or other services, please give me a call or shoot me an email at the same addresses or phone number that are posted on this last slide, and we'll do our best to put you in touch with a consultant who will meet the need of your client. I'm going to leave the presentation open for another 2 minutes. Like I said, if you have any questions for Dale, please feel free to submit them. Otherwise, we hope to see you at future TASA webinars. On behalf of Dale and everybody here at TASA, I thank you for taking an hour out of your day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.